Hello, I am Dr. Amit Singh, President of Edmonds College. I'm pleased to welcome you to this 32nd Legislative District Senate Candidate Forum. This is one part of a series of forums designed to help prepare voters for the November 8th general election. Edmonds College is proud to be a part of a coalition which includes the League of Women Voters for Snohomish County, the American Association of University Women, Snow Isle Libraries, NAACP Snohomish County, the Daily Herald, KSER and KXIR, C3 Coalition, and Sultan School District. Thank you, viewers and candidates, for your participation and for making civic engagement a priority. Now, I'm going to turn this to Valerie Kelly, who's a moderator, and will explain the process and the guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. We appreciate our partnership. This forum is co-presented, as Dr. Singh mentioned, by the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County and the Snohomish County Forum Coalition, whose members are C3 Coalition, AAUW, Edmonds College, the Daily Herald, KSER, KXIR, NAACP, Sultan School District, and Snow Isle Libraries. Thank you all for your continued support. I'm your moderator, Valerie Kelly, proud member of the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County. This forum will ask questions of the two candidates running for Washington State Senator, Legislative District 32. This legislative district crosses the Snohomish-King County line and includes Linwood, Mount Lake Terrace, and Shoreline. Candidates for State Legislative District 32 Senator are Jesse Salomon and Patricia Weber. The League thanks all the candidates for running for office, for their willingness to serve the community if elected, and for participating in this forum. We remind our viewers that it is the policy of the League to be nonpartisan. Therefore, we neither endorse nor oppose candidates or parties. We do educate and support voters and the election process in our communities. Rules for participation in this forum were sent ahead of time to all candidates, both candidates, and they have agreed to engage in respectful communication. Let me briefly explain the question and answer period rules. Questions have not been shared ahead of time with the candidates. We thank all those community members who sent us recommendations about local issues. Each candidate will have either 60 or 90 seconds to respond. There will be one question that will be yes or no only and will not be timed. I will state these changes clearly. We are using a countdown timer visible to all candidates. Time limits on answers will be strictly enforced. I will change the starting order for each question. The order for the first question will be Ms. Weber and then Mr. Salomon. First question, let's begin. The first question will be 60 seconds, and it is this. What qualifications and experience make you a strong candidate for this position? Ms. Weber?
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I am Dr. Patricia Weber. I am running for the 32nd District State Senate position. I'm a physician and have worked at a state institution for over 30 years here in Shoreline. I've also raised my son here in Shoreline. I've been an active participant in the 32nd LD Democratic Party for over 20 years and a PCO there for 10 years or more. I've lost track a little bit. In working for the state, I've been the recipient of both good and bad state legislation. So I have an understanding of how that affects the community. And I am willing to hear from the community how other legislation affects them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Weber. Mr. Salomon, same question.
Thank you. I've been honored to serve as your state senator for the last 4 years. Before that, I spent 7 years as a Shoreline City Council member and deputy mayor of the city. And for 15 years, I've been a public defender, sort of along that same time. I've had 2 jobs. Before that, I was a prosecutor in the child welfare sphere, protecting children from abuse. I graduated with a law degree from the University of Washington. I grew up in Seattle, spent about 40 years of my life in the Pacific Northwest, so love it here. I serve on the Law and Justice Committee in the Senate, as well as Agriculture, Natural Resources, Water and Parks, and Housing and Local Government. And I've been very engaged in terms of developing policy for next year that I hope to preview during this debate and explain what I'm working on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Salomon. The next series of questions will be each 90 seconds. So, Mr. Salomon, again to you. What are your priorities for the next legislative session?
I'm working on some issues around homelessness, drug addiction, police powers. Essentially, the question I'm trying to answer is, how do we improve the situation on our streets? Obviously, we have a lot of people struggling with housing, with addiction. I was assaulted on my way to pick up my son recently, about 10 blocks from my house. There was a murder at a bus stop by a mentally ill person against just somebody who was waiting for the bus on Aurora, about 20 blocks from my house. So like all of us, I'm experiencing this public health crisis too. We need accountability, but we're not likely to go back to the old ways of the quote unquote war on drugs. So what I'm working on is a bill that says, we're not, if you're using drugs in public, we're not putting you in jail as a punishment, but we're putting you essentially on some form of probation where you are accountable for doing treatment. So it says you can't just behave this way, but we're not going to criminalize you. And so if you actually do the treatment as required, your conviction or your mark against your record would be overturned and vacated. So we just want you to get that help. But it seems like wanting people to get help without any kind of accountability is not working right now. So I think we need to make some changes. I have a bill for that.
Thank you. Ms. Weber, same question.
Again, looking around the community, one of the things that drove me to even considering running for this position was healthcare within the state, but not healthcare insurance, because our state, being one of the more progressive ones, insures all but about 500,000 of our citizens. It's access to healthcare. As Senator Salomon mentioned, it's very good to encourage people to go to treatment. It's the access to treatment, and it's the access to mental health treatment that we find the biggest bottleneck to improving our state situation. The 2 other issues that I think are so important in our state and our community are affordable housing, not just homelessness, but affordable housing for a lot of those people that are being displaced that may or may not lead to homelessness. And then overall, because we have such a beautiful state and it intertwines with almost every other problem, is the environment. Keeping our environment healthy makes our citizens healthy. Providing housing first for our people keeps them healthy and will help them to promote a better environment as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Weber. We're going to start with you again on the next question. So, Ms. Weber, are you concerned about polarization in politics in Washington state? Why or why not?
I am absolutely concerned with the polarization. One of the hallmarks of the history of politics is to learn to coordinate, collaborate, and much as we may dislike it, to compromise somewhat. That's the only way to get things done. What we see by this polarization is ineffectiveness. I'm very concerned because I believe a lot of this polarization is being driven by the rise, and here in this state, it's becoming a problem, perhaps not well recognized, of the white nationalist belief system. And that is setting the agenda for the far right and creating more and more divisiveness and less understanding between people with different belief system. That attitude is so strong and so unyielding, it's making it hard for the rest of us to interact. And I know some people are going to say that the far left is equally unapproachable, but I don't believe those numbers are as strong. And I don't believe that the energy is quite the same as what we're seeing now.
Thank you, Ms. Weber. Mr. Solomon?
Thank you. So I like to doorbell voters. I go to their house, just randomly show up that live in my district to ask, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are you concerned about? I represent you in Olympia, and I want to stay close to you and hear what your thoughts are. Right now, obviously, Dobbs is a huge issue. I've been endorsed by Pro-Choice Washington and Planned Parenthood. And so I do hear about that, but mainly I'm hearing about we're afraid for our democracy. We think our democracy is under attack, it's under threat. And I agree. Not sure anybody else has had this experience. We had to call up 750 armed National Guard troops so that I and my colleagues could get to work on the first day of last year during COVID, because this was 5 days after January 6th, where the White House was overrun. The Congress was overrun. And a few days later, our governor's office across the street from our Capitol was overrun by protesters with guns, thugs with guns, and they were going to do it again. So we had to activate the National Guard. That's polarization. What I've done, however, is to build relationships as much as I can with my Republican colleagues and tell them I have my values, but I'm also willing to work with you where we can. A lot of my bills that I've passed have been bipartisan, and it's been noted in the Seattle Times during my endorsement.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Solomon. Starting again with you, Mr. Solomon. The next question, again, 90 seconds. What, if anything, should be done to mitigate concerns about climate change in Washington State?
A lot of things we need to be done to mitigate concerns. I was literally just up in on the Lummi Native American reservation, where they have an infestation of green crabs that have been brought in because the water has warmed. The larvae are able to come into our area and colonize. They disrupt the reproduction of our Dungeness crabs, of our kelp, and really keystone environmental indicators and species. So it's a very dangerous thing, and I've supported, and we've added $6 million into our operational budget to eradicate those. So a lot of what I do as the Vice Chair of Natural Resources is to mitigate against the effects of climate change. Right? We know it's coming, we know it's here, it's serious, and it's really scary. If you had been on the tour that I just went on, you would not be sleeping well. However, we have also done a lot. I was a co-sponsor of the Climate Commitment Act, so we are leading the charge in terms of a cap and trade system to reduce carbon. So on one hand, we need to continue to reduce carbon, move to clean energy. On the other hand, we need to continue to mitigate, because climate change is here, it's happening right now. And I'm very committed to that. I've been endorsed by the Sierra Club, Washington Conservation Voters. I pass all sorts of environmental bills on mitigation.
Great, thank you, Mr. Solomon. Ms. Weber, same question.
Thank you. You're testing our mute and unmute skills here. I am very concerned about climate change. I have been a believer in climate change since it was brought forth. I could see differences in the environment. I think one of the things that we need to do is stop burning fossil fuels. we're going to need some oil sources for other things, for other products, but we need to stop burning it and putting it in our atmosphere. I have signed the pledge to take no contributions greater than $200 from the fossil fuel industry. And I've signed that. It's on my website. I've also been endorsed by the Environment and Climate Change Caucus of the Democratic Party. We need to look at other resources in transportation. Perhaps a very popular item is to bring back rail, which uses only 1/3 of the fossil fuel sources that other motorized transport uses. I think this would be a great boon to Washington and the ways it can combat climate change, as well as using other renewable resources for our energy supply and making our energy grid much more efficient. Thank you.
Thank you. Continuing with you, Ms. Weber. Next question. What do you believe are the 3 best ideas for reducing the likelihood of violent firearms incidents in our state?
Again, I feel fortunate to live in Washington State because we have some progressive legislation on that, reducing the high capacity magazines, etc. It's the overwhelming influx of handguns that produces a lot of our local violence. I think there is currently a proposal for limiting ghost guns. I think we need to do much more strict, sorry, just lost my word, regulation on registering guns, on background checks to include every form of transaction. And that must have a background check. And then also registering all those serial numbers with law enforcement for that area. It also begs the question of mental health. And the frustration, I think, not so much mental health, not so much serious mental health, as those people are more likely to be the victims rather than the aggressors. But this generalized anxiety and lack of being able to accommodate and to control emotional outbursts, and to also learn to cooperate with others.
Thank you. Mr. Solomon, what would you like to tell us about your 3 ideas about firearms?
Sure. I think perhaps the most impactful bill, and unfortunately we learned this after the shooting in Texas, is a ban on assault weapons, which I do believe will be introduced in the Senate and will have more of a chance of passing this year, unfortunately, because we just keep seeing these tragedies. My skepticism there is, there's already a lot of assault weapons in the community, so it's hard to solve this problem, frankly. But I do have bills that I've developed, one around domestic violence, where an officer can ask, if an officer arrives at a domestic violence scene and has probable cause to believe there's been domestic violence, under this bill, they could literally call a judge, ask for a no contact order to be issued on an emergency basis, and remove the gun from the home right then and there. Because right now, and a lot of devils are in the details in terms of keeping domestic violence victims safe. Right now, one of the devils of the details is takes 5 days to get to court, to get that order signed, and then to go back and take those firearms. And a lot can happen in that meantime. So this bill is designed to prevent that. I also have a bill that I'm going to introduce on a 10-day waiting period, requiring live fire training so people can avoid accidental shooting.
Thank you. Staying with you, Mr. Solomon, next question. In your opinion, is there sufficient access to behavioral health care in Snohomish County and across the state of Washington? If yes, would you recommend any modifications to the programs? If no, would you prioritize to increase access?
There's not sufficient access. I don't think that's a question. I think the question is how do we solve that problem? We've put in tens of millions, I think 400 million as a response to the drug Blake ruling a couple of years ago into treatment. So there is money in the pipeline. The problem is, like you'll hear everywhere in different industries, workforce development. We don't have enough people entering into the training programs, for example, or exiting them at this point to scale up to the behavioral health challenges that we have. So in other words, it'll take some time, maybe a couple of years, even though money has been allocated for it. So that's just a reality that we're dealing with, and it's challenging. We absolutely do need to continue, and it's very clearly a priority. We need to continue to invest in mental health. It's obvious to myself, and I think the members of my caucus, that there's a mental health crisis caused by many factors. I'm proud, for example, to work with Representative Lauren Davis, who represents this district in the House, who spends almost all her time on mental health issues professionally and in her day job. And so we work and coordinate very closely together. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Solomon. Ms. Weber, the same question.
Yes, well, mental health with my work background has been a particular interest of mine, and I've been trying to think of ways and creative ways to approach this. There is definitely a lack of providers, and this is nationwide. It is not unique to Seattle, Snohomish County, or Washington. And there are plans across the nation on how to address this problem. One of the things that I've been thinking is we need to use perhaps more paraprofessionals. And what I can envision is almost a pyramid structure. So you have either a psychiatrist or a well-trained psychologist at the top of this pyramid that can then expand outreach through various levels, through other psychologists, through MSWs, through other paraprofessionals that can respond back and build a really strong pyramid and get this outreach done. One of the outreaches I would like to see is to schools to help. Apparently the anxiety, I've forgotten the statistics, the anxiety level, not just due to the pandemic, but because of our current social structure and social media, the anxiety level and the suicide rate of students is phenomenal. It's probably 20% at least of the students in our system right now. And I have a few other ideas, but I'm out of time.
Thank you, Ms. Weber. Okay, we're going to do the yes/no question that we mentioned earlier. This question is not timed. We just need a simple yes/no from each of you. And we'll start again with you, Ms. Weber. This is regarding voting options. Do you support ranked choice voting as a voting option? Yes or no?
Yikes.
Great. And Mr. Solomon?
It's not a yes or no question. I'm sorry. It's something I've thought about. I've considered. The way I like to listen to all sides of an issue and really be considered. I practiced law for a long time and did a lot of litigation. So I watched how judges make decisions, and they try not to have preconceived notions. They try to gather all the information and game out how this argument's going to play out, or in my case, how this law is going to play out. What are all the unintended consequences that might happen? That's the biggest question.
So no yes or no for sure. That's what
I can't answer it yes or no.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you. So now we're going to go back to our 90-second responses. And let's start again with you, Mr. Solomon. How would you propose to make housing or rent more affordable in our area?
Thank you. That's a question I've been working on for a long time as a member of the Housing and Local Government Committee. I passed a bill last year, 5818. I wrote that and passed it. And it to some extent, so this only applies to urban areas, incorporated cities. to some extent, some of our land use environmental laws have been captured by people who are anti-development to stop housing development. So we exempted small houses, so 1,500 square feet or less units from some of those appeals processes in order, and also apartment buildings up to a threshold of 200. Because that's one of the things that stops development. And I look, whether you like it or not, the law of economics is supply and demand. Fundamentally, you can look at countries that ignore it, they implode economically. So I do believe that we need to add more supply. That if we restrict, if we just look at things like rent control, that we're going to have less housing development. So that overall, the people who don't have those rent control units will be paying more for housing. I think that's been shown to be a very clear result. So I'm an extremely strong proponent of the Growth Management Act. We do not need sprawl out into our farmlands, out into forests. We need to keep wildlife for wildlife.
Great. Thank you for that answer. And Ms. Weber, housing and rent.
So I agree that we need more quantity. I think we have to look at how that is being built. My question is, and I can see this here in Shoreline, why there's more and more housing and yet the affordability is not following. And my question is, why? Why is it that profits must come before people and profits must come before the environment? I don't think it's a binary decision that you can only have profits and the heck with everything else, or we can stop development and tend to the people and the environment. I'm sure there are middle ground ways to do this. Is it going to decrease a little bit of profitability? Probably, but there are still going to be, and we cannot be held hostage to the development companies to their demands. There have got to be ways to make more rational decisions, to make better design that improve the environment, again, which leads to a healthier population and a stronger community. So I think we've got to look at some of the regulations, making them stronger, making the fines stronger, and putting some of those fine funding into a program to help fund other low-cost housing.
Thank you. And next question. Ms. Weber again, what are your ideas for ensuring that sufficient infrastructure is built or planned for in surrounding areas to support proposed development?
Thank you. I've been pondering this because I hear this come up, especially with this density housing, which we know we have to have, and it seems logical to place it near transit availability. And yet, I think the capacity for infrastructure is being glossed over. Again, we're going to have to hold local governing boards accountable. They are going to have hold the developers accountable. We as people are going to have to say we need stronger local governments, stronger state governments, and perhaps even another oversight commission, or I've been trying to find out who is the oversight to make sure the growth management protocols are being followed, because a lot of times they leave it up to local government, local ordinances, and then things start to be brushed aside, things start to get de-emphasized when we think the emphasis needs to be there, particularly for wastewater, for surface water, for the aquifer. A lot of that is not actually addressed, or it is just very, very superficially addressed.
Great, thank you, Ms. Weber. Mr. Salomon, same question.
Sure, thank you. I'm proud to say, first of all, we hear a lot of complaints about politics. let's take stock of some of the victories that we've had here in Washington State. We've had a very productive 5 years with Democratic control. I'm proud to have got the transportation package to a place last year that I could support, and we passed $16 billion in new infrastructure funding, the greenest transportation package that we've ever had. And one of my demands was $500 million for stormwater funding. A little bit of an aside here, but we talk about salmon and orcas as heritage, as iconic animals that for the Northwest. But when we built our roads and our infrastructure, we route pollution directly to where they live, and it's very harmful and destructive. So that money will retrofit to prevent some of that stormwater. Concurrency. So when we charge impact fees for local development, that then funds the parks and the schools and the roads that are impacted by new development. There is a challenge to that because it adds to the cost of new housing, and we have a housing crisis. So there's a tension there, which is often something you find in policymaking. Is there a tension between a good and a bad thing?
Thank you.
Time.
Thank you. Staying with you, Mr. Salomon. Do you believe the taxing system in Washington State is equitable and sufficient to meet the needs of the state and local communities? If not, what changes would you propose?
Well, it's more regressive. So if you are earning less, it's largely significantly based on sales tax. And so people who earn less spend more of their income on goods and services and save less. So then proportionately, they're paying more in taxes, maybe not by dollar value, but by proportion than wealthier people. We did, and I did support pass a capital gains tax. I think it's a 7% tax on profits from sale of stock or second home real estate, profits above $250,000. So people are making a lot of money, paying a little bit. I think that is going to add a lot of revenue for early childhood education. That's what it's going for, and earned income tax credits. So it's a direct payment to those at the lowest income. I think we're interested in looking at a B&O style income tax if we can get some consensus around that. So businesses, so this is not an income tax for everybody. It's for businesses, because the way we do it now is inequitable. It's based on gross receipts, not profits. And so if you have a margin of 150% and 1%, you're paying much more of your proportional tax at 1%. So
Great.
Looking at getting some consensus around evening that out. But
thank you. Ms. Weber, taxation.
Thank you. Washington is the most regressive state in the union as far as taxing goes. So we really need to address the equity in taxing. I support, as the legislature did, the capital gains tax, which I know is under scrutiny right now or is under judicial review right now, but I support it. I myself am not opposed to an income tax, but that is going to be a pretty big lift across the state, as we've seen. When we talk about taxes, what we actually mean is revenue. And the state is going to need revenue to provide all the services that we expect a government to provide. I'd like to look at some of the tax exemptions and the tax the other exemptions and things that the state gives to very large businesses or corporations or certain individuals. And these are not transparent. And yet they are a significant portion of the entire budget of the state. And I'd like to have more transparency, more equity in seeing those and seeing how those are applied.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Weber. So on to the next question. Ms. Weber, would you support making changes to the existing state laws or the state constitution regarding abortion access? Why or why not? If so, what changes would you propose?
I would propose, I think we have a good set of laws. We've all prided ourselves on our current law system. I would propose strengthening those and make them even somehow, and I'm sorry, I don't know legally how to do this, but to make them even more resistant to any kind of national activity that would be proposed. I'd have to find out and obviously get consults from people on how to do that. I would like to see if we have to continue this way in providing services to a lot of the so-called health migrants that are coming to our borders, we can strengthen our laws in setting up more clinics. I'd like to see maybe some reciprocity in medical licensing so that providers from neighboring states can come and help fill any of the workforce needs that we need to provide all of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Weber. Mr. Salomon, same question.
Yes, thank you. I absolutely support a constitutional amendment to codify and protect a person's right to choose their reproductive health care and whether they want to have a child. I think what the U.S. Supreme Court has done is a complete travesty. I am proud to have been endorsed by Pro-Choice Washington and Planned Parenthood votes. And I'll tell you that the rest of my caucus feels the same way. Senate Democrats have already met and laid out a broad action plan agenda that includes liability protection for abortion providers, that includes non-cooperation with other states who are asking to extradite their healthcare refugees, or whatever we're calling it now. We will not send them to be prosecuted. No, not at all. And we are going to increase funding for healthcare migrants to come from out of state. If they need that care, they can come here. We've committed to doing that, and I commit to doing that. What the court has done is not okay. Overturning 50 years of precedent after lying to get on the court saying they would not overturn that precedent. They've hurt their legitimacy.
Thank you, Mr. Salomon. Sticking with you and sticking with healthcare. As independent healthcare systems merge with religious healthcare systems, do you have concerns about any resulting limited healthcare options? What actions, if any, would you recommend?
I do have concerns. I think for the obvious reasons that religious institutions that are running hospitals and conglomerating their power over what services are provided during a post-Dobbs, post-Roe v. Wade situation is quite concerning. I'll tell you, if I had a minute, I could look up the bill number. We have moved bills. Senator Emily Randall is running for re-election the 26th, who used to work for Planned Parenthood, has introduced a bill limiting those mergers. And I can't remember how it fared last year, but I support that bill and will work to make sure, again, that women and anybody who needs reproductive health care can get the access that they need.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Salomon. Ms. Weber?
Actually, this is a very serious concern of mine. And I would very much support a bill to limit any further mergers. Also, I think for the mergers that have happened, we have got to keep the full expansion of medical services. These are medical services, and everyone seems to be focused currently on reproductive services, legitimately so, to be focused on that. But there's more expansion of that than just whether terminations are provided. It may even go into total whether birth control is provided or not. There's also another segment that's not often spoken about, but we have the right to die with dignity. That is not going to be honored or observed in most religious hospitals, in religious hospitals of certain sects. That is not going to be honored or observed. It's taking away patient choice in many, many areas where that's just not acceptable. If it is not the patient's faith, the patient should not be forced to follow that faith in their medical services, and it needs to be entirely secular.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Weber. Okay, we're going to set the timer now for 60 seconds. And we want to offer each of you the opportunity to ask a question of your opponent related specifically to the issues and answers you've heard during this forum. So Ms. Weber, sticking with you, what would you like to ask of Mr. Salomon?
Thank you. Well, hi, Mr. Salomon. I've had a somewhat lingering question. And I know you like to promote your environmental credentials and some of the endorsements, and yet you still continue to take corporate monies from industries that are totally non-environmentally concerned. And
okay,
my
thank you for
question
that
is why?
question. Yeah. Could you have 60 seconds to answer, Mr. Salomon?
What's the question?
Go ahead, Ms. Weber, finish.
Why do you continue to take corporate donations from non-environmentally responsible corporations?
Thank you.
Well, the reason is, and I'm proud to say that I've been able to cycle a lot of that money to go towards races like in the 26th with Emily Randall, who are being challenged by Republicans. Obviously, a Democrat's going to win in this district, but we have a funding system of elections, which I have passed a bill on to alter, but didn't completely alter it because of U.S. Supreme Court rulings, where you need to raise money because the other side's coming at you. You do not, in fact, it's illegal to take money in exchange for promising a vote. So you have to, and I do, hold my integrity. I listen to both sides, and that's why both sides send money. They want to be heard. I have been endorsed by Washington Conservation Voters, which is the primary player in the environmental sphere in the legislature.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Salomon, what would you like to ask of Ms. Weber about what you've heard tonight from her?
I don't have any questions.
Great. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Salomon, sticking with you, this is our last question. Please keep the timer at 60 seconds, timer. What additional issues or information would you like to bring to the attention of the community?
I'm working on several other bills. One of them is around law enforcement arbitration reform. So we have a system where a lot of police discipline that's imposed by sheriffs is overturned through essentially a private, you can hire a private attorney to sit in judgment of that and essentially reinstate officers. And we know nationally that 50% of officers have their punishment lessened or are reinstated. So, for example, if you use excessive force, makes it very hard for somebody who comes in with the right intentions to make reforms in the police department. So I drafted that bill in response to the George Floyd murders. What I'm trying to do is not eliminate every police power, but to go after the bad apples. Okay, and that's an important distinction because we do need our police to keep our community safe, and I appreciate that.
So thank you, Mr. Salomon. Ms. Weber, last question for you about additional information or issues.
Oh, well, I think perhaps because it hasn't been brought up this evening, my thoughts also went to public safety. I hear a lot of concerns from the individuals I talk to also as I go to their houses and speak with them. It is the strong concern of individuals feeling that they're not really safe. And I know that we're trying to balance the effectiveness of law enforcement as well as moderate any excessive force that has come to our recent attention as well. So I've been trying to hear both sides, both the public, people that feel threatened by police, people that feel much more secure and want more police presence. And it's going to be a very difficult balancing act, but one that needs to be done.
Thank you, Ms. Weber. And we've come to the end of our questions. So the League appreciates these candidates, both of you, for joining us and for running for office. A recording of this forum and others will be available on the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County website and YouTube channel. Find links at lwvsnoho.org. We encourage you to explore additional information about these and all candidates. The Snohomish County voter pamphlet will be mailed to residences starting October 8th. Vote411.org, sponsored by the League of Women Voters, is another good source for nonpartisan voting information. Ballots will be mailed on October 20th, and Election Day is November 8th. Please be a voter. This concludes our candidate forum. Thank you to our coalition partners and the team members who made this forum possible. And thank you to all of you for joining us.